Thanks for joining us. Our guest this week is the governor's budget director, Chris Harkins, on spending about $81 billion of your tax dollars. Our lead stories: a recall movement in the Michigan House, and the Attorney General files charges against 16 Republicans. Election fraud is the charge. On the OTR panel, Chad Livengood, Jordan Hermany, and Zachary Gorchow. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Here we go. Welcome to Studio C, Off the Record. Nice to have you all on board here as we await to cross-examine the budget director. $81 billion, that's a lot of money, isn't it? Anyway, listen, the Attorney General was busy this week. What was she doing, Chad?
She was leveling some pretty serious charges against the 16 Republicans who posed as Michigan's electors, claiming that Donald Trump had won the election. They signed official certificates that went to the National Archives. It was an effort to try to basically claim themselves as the alternates, which is not the way the process works when the presidential election is decided, which Joe Biden won Michigan by 154,000 votes. We've all memorized that number over and over. But they showed up at the Capitol trying to gain access, and she has now brought a whole host of fraud conspiracy charges against them, uttering and publishing type charges, in order to basically say that they were trying to commit fraud in an effort to overturn the 2020 election.
And
these were people who admittedly should have known better. We have everybody from the former Michigan Republican Party co-chair, Meshawn Maddock, to a current Shelby Township clerk, Stan Grott. The mayor of Wyoming is one of these false electors. These are individuals who say, at least some of them say, that they maybe weren't aware of what they were signing at the time, but some of them are, currently claiming that this is a witch hunt. I know that the state Republican Party has been lobbying all sorts of accusations against Nessel, that she is a tyrant for bringing forward these charges, that these were people acting in what they saw as the best course of action for their government. Regardless of how you feel, Nessel is going to have to prove this out in court. There is a long way to go still, but it is admittedly not looking great for these 16 individuals.
It's a unique case. Obviously, there's really nothing like this that's ever happened when it comes to electoral college votes, and it's going to go, I think, to the attempts by these people who would have been Trump electors to say, well, we didn't really know, what we were doing. We weren't trying to subvert the election. The argument is already like, well, we were just being prepared in case a court ruled that something changed in Michigan, and then we had done what we needed to do. But obviously, like Jordan said, this is all going to have to be proved out in court. But if you go back to, I think it was December 14th, it was a day in December in any event, in 2020, that was a very fraught time. A lot of these folks showed up at the north side of the Capitol and were expecting to be, attempting to get their way into the building, and had to be denied by the Michigan State Police. And they were not, at the time, the argument was not, we're doing this just in case. The argument was, Donald Trump won Michigan, and we're the rightful electors. That was the context of what this was happening in.
The question that kind of arises here is this part of a national roundup, essentially, where there were other efforts in other states? And we're going to find out probably in the near future whether the special counsel, Jack Smith, appointed by the Attorney General, has a larger global case here, because there were individuals that were involved with the 16 electors who aren't charged here. And that's a kind of curious little aspect of this, is whether there's a bigger federal roundup essentially about to happen in a larger case revolving around whether Donald Trump himself orchestrated an effort to subvert the will of the people.
Well, Ms. Nessel is getting criticism that her net was not bigger, and her argument is she has these fish to fry, which are her Michigan fish.
Well, just to be clear, the Attorney General filed these major charges and didn't hold a press conference, hasn't answered any questions about it. We don't don't know a lot about this case other than what is in the charging documents and what's been publicly reported for months on end. But yeah, top Republican officials like Kathy Burden, the Republican National Committee woman, and Michonne Maddock, the co-chair, it appears from the charging documents they were the ringleaders of this. And then these 70 and 80-year-old people these delegates as long-time Republican activists, they showed up and signed this piece of paper, and now they're claiming we didn't understand that this was going to be forwarded on to the National Archives and the chief judge of the district court.
Did I read correctly that Laura Cox, who was then the Republican Party chair, sort of ad hoc advised this committee that to take the stance as a backup plan rather than saying we are the electors?
Laura Cox's role in all this is a little bit murky. Now, interestingly, she was called to testify before the Congressional Select Committee on this and revealed at the time to the widening eyes of everyone at this table, no doubt, that there had been discussion among these electors about sneaking into the Capitol the night before the Electoral College vote so that they couldn't be denied access. And I believe when she found out about that, what she told the committee under oath was she thought that idea was insane and inappropriate. So that being said, at the time, Laura Cox was doing a lot of things to try to help the Trump campaign make the arguments about the accuracy of the election. Her exact role, like I said, is not exactly clear, but it does seem, while she had allowed the group to meet at what was then the state Republican Party headquarters to talk about this, that she was not part and parcel of this plan.
When do we get a resolution? Years from now?
I don't think it'll take that long, but I don't think that we should be holding our breath that this is going to be resolved by the end of the year. For instance, I believe their next court date is August 1st, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's going to be a zoo.
That is 16 people, and how many lawyers are going to get involved? I mean, this could be a complete circus, and how they're going to manage this. I mean, I was asking whether they're going to hold this hearing in the Lansing City Council chambers, because it's going to be so monstrous to try to handle all these defendants at once. And yes, there's an open question about are Laura Cox and her top staff the star witnesses against the fake Trump electors, and I think that's part of the coming attractions here.
All right, so if you thought that was an interesting story, here we go with recalls. We haven't had a recall in town in a long time, Z.
Well, there's a good reason for that. It's very, very difficult to recall an elected official.
Lawmakers finally woke up and said, you know what, we got to make this tougher to recall us.
So various entities, the exact origins of which are not totally clear, but it seems they are of a conservative bent, have filed petitions to recall 5 Democratic members of the House and 1 Republican member of the House. Now, anybody can file a petition. What it really takes is, 1, a tremendous amount of resources for the legal and litigation onslaught to prevent it from getting any further is coming, and 2, the ability, thus far never done, to gather an equivalent number of signatures from registered voters to 25% of the total vote for governor in the last gubernatorial election in, 60 days. No one's ever done it since this law was reconfigured in 2012. There have been several attempts. They've always come up short. The odds are against this from the jump. Because 1, it's not clear where the resources are coming to support this, and 2, the Democrats, and in the case of the 1 Republican who also is targeted, will fight this tooth and nail in the courts and to fight every signature for validity there is.
The alleged allegations are, and the objection is that one of them voted for Speaker Tate, okay, and
That's
they
the
want to
Republican one.
Yes, and the gun safety legislation they didn't like, and the hate crimes. Who's behind this? Do we know? That's the beauty of this story. It looks like some of the people that are there ran against these people before were opponents in the last election.
In that case of Cam Cabot up in northern Michigan, he's got some Republicans in his district that want to take him out somehow, and or take him down a notch. I think he kind of fell into that seat, so to speak, with some connections to a certain former speaker, and so yes, there's some question. There's going to be a whole lot of local politics entangled in this. The other thing this actually sets off is recall the effort against Governor Whitmer, and even monstrous larger hill to climb, where she was able to go out and get donations above the legal limit. This is likely going to trigger that, and so someone like Betsy Kofia up in Traverse City, where there's a lot of money and a lot of Democratic money now, all of a sudden, she's going to be able to just start, pouring in money, and then the Republicans want to try to take her out in the actual election next year. And that's it. She's going to have a running start here, probably.
I mean, her and Jamie Churches down in Wyandotte, they are both occupying, admittedly, extremely purple seats. I think they both won by about 1% overall of the vote, 1% higher than their opponent. So this ability to endlessly fundraise effectively might just be the boon that they need, that otherwise, I think we saw in reports earlier this week, some Republicans saying there might not be a snowball's chance of getting a Republican to be able to financially successfully be able to run against them because of this now.
What has Matt Hall said, the Republican leader? I heard crickets.
There's a lot of crickets. Well, I will say what's comical about the targeting of Cam Cavett, the Republican, it's clearly from the really right wing of the party, is the way the recall law is structured. If the Republicans up there, if some of them want to take him out, they can't do it. The way the law was configured in 2012, the incumbent who is targeted is the automatic nominee in a recall election. There is no primary. So I don't know what they think they're doing up there other than maybe, getting a little bit of attention. But the only person who could beat Cam Cavett is a Democrat or a member of another party, and that's not going to happen in that district.
They're probably better off mounting an actual primary next year, the way the election normally works, if they want to take Cam Cavett out.
Well, the surprising thing about this is that the chatter from the gun lobby was we're going to do this in late summer. Okay, so that shoe is yet to drop. So these people beat them to the punch. But you mentioned the word recall in the legislature. It has a chilling effect whether it has a snowball's chance or not. Yes?
It does historically, but again, that law changed so much after the recall of Paul Scott, the Republican who voted for, I think, an education budget or something back in 2011.
MEA didn't like him.
MEA took him out. And so after that, the Republicans and under Jase Bolger decided we need to change this law and make it almost next to impossible to recall a sitting member of the legislature.
Now let's call in Chris Harkin and see what he's got to say. Director, welcome back to Off the Record. Good to see you. Let's start with an easy one. Based on the spending that was in this budget, do you think the next budget will have some cuts because the revenue to sustain this spending won't be there?
Oh, no, Tim. What we've got is a budget where we focus really clearly on one-time versus ongoing revenues. And what we put together along with the Democratic leadership in both the House and Senate was a budget that spends our ongoing revenues appropriately. And we look forward every time we put a budget together. So when, as you all know, as we do our revenue conference in May, we use that to finalize these sort of numbers. And we've put together a budget that we feel really good, given what we've seen in May, will be good.
Sarah Lightner, the ranking Republican on House Appropriations, has said publicly we are going to have to cut programs next time. She's wrong?
Well, I think what we do every time we do a budget, it's a living and breathing document, right? And so we make changes throughout the budget every year.
So that's your maybe it might happen.
Well, I'll never say never, Tim, but I think what we see based on the revenues that we've got that come from a consensus process that is really, it's nationally recognized as being a strong consensus process, because we have people, we take our fiscal experts in the state, our treasurer and our nonpartisan House and Senate fiscal agencies, and they work together and come up with numbers. And we trust those numbers, and we work with those numbers across the aisles, and that's what we base our decision making on. And so we've done that. We did that in May. We'll look at those numbers again in January, and we'll do that before the governor puts out her budget. and we'll adjust as we go. But that's the beauty of our budget process, is it does live and it breathes, and we supplement and change as we go. But right now, the ongoing spending that you see in these budgets that the legislature passed, we think we can sustain that sort of spending, yes.
Well, do you think it would have been wise to reserve more of this surplus, say $1 billion, as a hedge in case of some type of economic problem? I mean, I know there's like $1 billion in the rainy day fund, and now there's whatever 400 some million in a new school aid rainy day fund. But to spend it all down in almost one fell swoop, is that risky? You've seen, how fast revenues can drop and how fast a budget stabilization fund can be expended.
It's a great question, Zach, but we've actually got nearly $2 billion in the rainy day fund at this point, with the $100 million that the legislature's put in the current fiscal year, and then the one that we're putting again in fiscal 24. So we've got almost $2 billion there. And as you point out, for the first time ever, we're putting $450 million into a new school aid rainy day fund, which is, I think it's a great proposal. It's something I'm really pleased to have seen stay through from the governor's recommendation all the way through the legislative process. I think you can always put more money away, but it's also important that we take taxpayer dollars and fund things that taxpayers want us to do. We have to continue to do things like invest in roads, invest in schools, but we also took some of those revenues and put them back in people's pockets, right? So we also had tax cuts. We have targeted tax cuts and things like the changes for the working families tax cut that helps bring people out of poverty. We've got tax changes as well for our retirees. So those spends have to be, those are spending offsets. We do debate with the legislature. We debate even internally where to spend those resources. But I think what you see is an attempt to put some of those dollars into reserve while also activating some of those dollars as we put the budget together.
To that point, though, about spending, on things that our constituents, the Michiganders, want, the recently signed education budget had about $611 million increase per pupil. The GOP has recently been lobbying complaints, though, that the amount of pork that's in this budget could have gone to other places. I mean, we have spending for instance, like a new cricket field in Troy. How do we justify then, spending on what some might see as just sort of pet or throwaway projects?
Yeah, it's, as you look at what people would call a pork project or a special project, I think it's important that we also pull back and understand that one person's pork project may be very valuable in a certain community, right? And that we've worked with this legislature very specifically, Jordan, to make sure that the projects that the legislature has included are public purpose projects, right? And that there is a reason that taxpayer dollars should support these things. And if you look across the board, as the legislature, as the administration puts a budget together, typically we look at things and do it from a statewide perspective. But as we work with our legislative partners, a lot of times we find that there is a community that needs an additional resource, something like a fire truck, right? And in that case, that may look like pork to someone outside of that community, but for a community that needs that resource, I think there's a lot of argument that that's valuable spend within a certain area. So I think it really depends on both where you're at and what the perspective is, but it's an ongoing question, and it's one that kind of happens throughout that budget process every year.
In this current fiscal year budget, there was $6.8 million to dredge a lake north of Clare in the former Speaker Jason Wentworth's district. What went into the decision making on why we should dredge this one lake versus the other 1,000 lakes that have a dam on them in Michigan? There are probably other people, and even the governor's own environmental department says this is not a priority lake.
Well, I think, as I was saying a few moments ago, as you go through a legislative process and you come out with a budget, there's a little bit of give and take. And I think the administration's preference is to fund statewide programs, to make sure, as you're pointing out, Chad, that we have the resources necessary to do an evaluative program and understand where the priorities may need to be. But as we go through and negotiate with our legislative friends, sometimes we find that a particular project or a particular interest may rise to the top, and we work within those confines. We'd like to make sure that these are still things that have public purpose. There's still people who are positively impacted by that. But sometimes this is, as I said before, it's not only a living, breathing document, but a state budget is still a political document and we need to recognize that.
So the Governor Whitmer horse trades for votes for budget bills.
Well, I don't know that I like to use the phrase horse trade, Chad, but I think it's a matter of having active conversations with the legislature to see how we can make sure we have those resources necessary to deliver for the people of Michigan.
So in some cases, what you're saying is you have to hold your nose and do something that you don't want to do.
Tim, I have to do that every day of my life. As a father and a husband, I do that everywhere I go. I do that throughout.
You're the budget director. You're the gatekeeper. You're the guy that says this is good, this is bad. And in this case, you said we're going to turn our eye. We're going to turn away.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of turning away, Tim. I think in a lot of instances, it's still a matter of making sure that we can understand the need for that project.
You had other dams that needed work to be done that could save people's lives if those dams go, and you worked on a project of dredging which basically had no impact on human life other than the people living around the lake.
Well,
right?
I think what we find, though, Tim, is that we do still have spending to support things like dam safety throughout a budget. Right? So we still find ways to make sure that our state departments are successful in delivering things that are impactful for people and that do try to protect the people in the state. So it's a matter of ensuring that we still have those resources to do what our experts, our state agencies know what they need to do, and we work within those confines.
I was surprised that relatively little, in fact, very little of the surplus was put into roads, just given the origins of this governor, as everyone knows, the fix the damn roads governor. But there was even after the bond issue that was done, which pumped a lot of money or sped up a lot of money into state-owned roads, the local roads have been crying out like, hey, there's been no increase in our funding since that 2015 plan. And here there was billions and billions sitting out there that could have been directed into local roads, and it wasn't. What happened?
Well, again, I think as we put a budget together, and you all know, it's this current budget that we expect the governor will sign at some point soon for fiscal year 24 is roughly $82 billion. And it's a lot of, you have to take a lot of priorities and put them together. As we look at roads, we know, as you point out, we've got a lot of revenues coming in from some of those bond resources, and we're using those, deploying those around the state. I know as I drive around, there's a lot of orange barrels around right now, and we're making some of that progress. But as we try to figure out how to deploy those one-time resources, we have put money into roads. We've managed to put some money into things like bridge bundling, which allows us to use those resources really effectively and make sure we improve both bridges and some of those roadways around the bridges. We've expanded that use to some local facilities as well. And then we're also working on some new or creative deployment of things like intermodal connective spots where buses and cars might connect, or where boats and other items connect with other forms of transportation. So there is still a focus on making sure we've got improved roads. But I think it still requires a much longer conversation on what those sort of, how we're going to continue to fund our roads, how we're going to make sure we improve as we go forward. But we did put resources into roads, and I think, again, you're seeing a lot of that impact as you try to drive around town right now.
One thing I can't help but wonder is that, back during the Snyder administration, we sort of arbitrarily imposed this summertime deadline of the budget, which we know, legally the budget does not have to be completed until later in the year. As a result, I mean, we're working with $82 billion, which is an inconceivable amount of money for so many individuals. And, we have a budget where, admittedly, not as much money is going towards roads, or we have it going towards random sort of lake dredging. I mean, do you think at all a budget of this size could be a victim to this arbitrary deadline? And do we ever see ourselves kind of getting away from this Snyder era marker?
I think what we've tried to do is, the governor puts forward a budget in the end of January or February, and that's a really public document. I know when we share those things with you all, we've got hundreds and hundreds of pages of information and backup, and we share those things. And then the legislature goes through a pretty robust process of public debate and subcommittees. I think this legislature did a really nice job of having far more active subcommittee conversations. Some of them even went around the state to do so and get feedback. And then they produced their own budgets. And I think that the time it takes to do that will vary and can vary every year. I think trying to get something done ahead of time is valuable. It allows us to still try to make sure we don't run out the clock. I think there's a lot of danger in that answer as well. But using this kind of July 1st marker as a goal, I think is still valuable because it helps to make sure that we are still pushing forward so that you're not letting a budget languish as well.
Do you think it, to Chad's point, encourages like horse trading in the sense that we need to make this deadline, so I will give you this pet project if you in turn help vote and get us across the finish line?
I don't think that a July 1st statutory deadline really forces that sort of conversation. I think that working with the people that we have in charge now will take as long as we need to make sure we have a budget that is correct and spends taxpayer money wisely. If it means we have to go longer, we'll go longer. But in this case, we didn't need to do that this year, and we were able to get a budget done, I think, and a good budget done before that statutory requirement.
Will you stay for an overtime?
Sure, Chip.
Chad's got a quick question.
The majority of these projects were added after the after the committee process. Would you support having just larger grants that people have to apply for, so that like there's $124 million that for 20 school districts that get for specific projects? A lot of school districts, hundreds of school districts, didn't get in on that deal.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, Chad, to make sure, again, the administration always likes to have statewide programs to support projects across the state and to do a grant to make sure we can evaluate those things. I think having the resources, deploying them appropriately like that's a fine idea.
Take a deep breath. We'll do some closed credits, come back, and we'll continue.
Great.
Fair enough?
Sounds good.
All right, go to WKAR.org for overtime on OTR with the budget director.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.